Hello and welcome to our show today. I'm Doug Brignoli with SmartTraining365.com, Brig University. We are going to talk about a subject today that has been talked about for decades. It is the subject of whether compound exercises are better than isolation exercises or not. If compound exercises are really essential, foundational, as we've been told they are. And the reason we're going to talk about this is because it's the crux of what we do here with the physics of fitness, the physics of resistance exercise, Brig University and Smart Training 365. What we do is we dissect the science, the physics, the physiology, the neurology of resistance exercise and identify what is actually productive and what isn't, and to what degree. And that's what's important, because a lot of times what happens is we're told this works the so-and-so, this works the this muscle, this works to that muscle, as if it's black and white, as if it's worked, it's good, as if, no, there are degrees of it being worked. There are degrees of beneficial, half beneficial, full range of motion, partial range of motion, proper alignment, proper resistance curve, full activation or partial activation, etc. So there's degrees of good, and that's what's important to understand. Is it's not just a matter of saying that a muscle is either activated or it's not. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is going to reveal to you that there's so much more that needs to be explained, that needs to be understood, that is explained in our course, that will allow you to fully grasp which exercises are better than which other exercises and why. That's what's important, the why. Okay, so the question we have to ask ourselves is this. If compound exercises are truly better than isolation exercises, we need to understand why. We need to identify the reason and the amount of load per muscle. We can actually identify, because this is a physics-related thing, we can identify how much load a muscle gets during each exercise by understanding the angle of the limbs. So we need to understand why. The problem that a lot of us have is that we are told that compound exercises are essential, they're foundational, and so we just accept it. We don't question it. We don't say why, to what degree, how does this compare with that, which exercise is better, if it's better, why, if it's not as good, why. Questions we all need to ask. Biomechanics is what allows us to do this. Okay, so these are the burning questions that we have to ask ourselves about compound exercises. Do they burn more calories than isolation exercises? Yes, and the reason for that is because there's more than one muscle involved, all of them demanding exercise at one time. So it is a higher calorie demand, a higher oxygen demand. There's no doubt about that. Do they save time? No. Why not? Because if you're working, let's say, 3 muscles in one compound exercise, the question we have to ask ourselves is, does that mean we don't have to do any other exercises for those 3 muscle groups? No, we actually still have to do that, because the degree of activation that occurs in each of those 3 muscles during that compound exercise isn't sufficient, because, as you'll soon see, it is compromised. The participation of each of those muscles in that exercise is compromised, and therefore you need another exercise, usually an isolation exercise, for each of those 3 other muscles. So it doesn't save time. You'd be better off actually just doing the isolation exercises, because if you're doing the compound and the isolation, you're actually doing more time, not less time. Do they produce more strength gains than isolation exercise? Now, some of you who are adherents to powerlifting would say, well, yes, absolutely. And I would say no. Positively no. And the reason is simple. A muscle that is working to maximum capacity is working to maximum capacity. It doesn't know whether other muscles are working at the same time or not, right? So a muscle gets stronger when it works to capacity, right? So the idea that just because you're lifting more weight at one time while using 3 muscles, and that somehow those muscles are getting stronger than each of those 3 muscles would be getting if you challenge them equally as much, but alone, one at a time, that's just not logical. It doesn't make any sense. So no, the strength gains that are made with isolation exercises are every bit as good, if not better, than they are when you're working 3 muscles at one time. Just as an example of how physics works. All right, so here you can see that I've put this hook here with a much shorter distance than here, right? Both of these trays are empty, right? Both of these trays are empty, and yet the one on the right falls, right? So this just shows you how a longer lever magnifies everything more. If I put the same amount of weight on both of these trays, this is going to be heavier, right? So this is the compound exercise. This is the isolation exercise, right? This is what you're trying to do when you're squat. You're having to use a whole lot of weight because you're not getting efficient mechanics. We're going to talk about why exercises that are considered compound exercises are so popular. How do we get to this point where we think that they're the Holy Grail? How do we get here to the point that we think they're foundational or maybe even sacred, right? Some people think they're the sacred cows, that heaven forbid that you say anything derogatory about a compound exercise. It's like, how did we get here? All right, so this is how it started. We have to understand this was us as Homo sapiens, killing beasts so that we could eat, right? Fighting, foraging, climbing, doing hard labor. Now, it's hard to know the exact intellectual capacity of Homo sapiens, but there's evidence to believe that they had enough intelligence to know that the more fit they were, the stronger they were, that they would be more able to do the hunting better, the protecting better, the foraging better, and all that. So you could see here, this was dominated by gymnastics, acrobatics, calisthenics. The use of weights hadn't really begun yet. But it was all about chin-ups and dips and climbing and vaulting and things like this. And there were gyms like this. There were these outdoor gymnasiums, outdoor parks, and indoor facilities too that I saw pictures of, where you could see that it was all about calisthenics, acrobatics, gymnastics. Then came the 20th century. And in the 20th century, we started playing around with weights. And it was mostly a matter of exhibition. So this is important because this right here is kind of the beginning of what led to powerlifting. And it's important to understand this, that powerlifting came from exhibition lifting, demonstrations of strength. In other words, the lift was the end unto itself. It was not the means to an end. So yes, certainly they would prepare for that lift, but they weren't doing it for another reason. They were doing it for the purpose of lifting as much as they could for business and entertainment. Understand is that strength and muscle growth are not opposite. They are synonymous. Right? Now you might be lifting heavy weight over your head because you think it's impressive. You'll get a lot of praise from your peers. You get a lot of accolades. And oh no, I don't really care if my muscles grow or not. And secretly you do. Now the guy over here who says, I don't really care how much I lift. I just want my physique to be bigger and stronger and look, more attractive. He has to lift weights in order to do that. He's going to get stronger in that process. Exhibition of strength is not strength building. Strength building happens anytime you challenge a muscle with resistance. That's strength building. So the belief that exhibition of strength, like how much do you bench, how much do you squat, how much do you overhead press, that only those lifts build strength is ridiculous, right? All lifts build strength. Muscles can only be made larger by becoming stronger. Okay, so on the slide on the left here, you'll see what was an old school lift called the floor press. And you can see that the way it was done is they would put these wooden blocks underneath the weights, just enough so you could slide underneath it, just to get clearance, right? And from that point, you would then press it up. And of course, humans being what humans are, right, competitive at almost every level, well, if I can do this much, how much can you do, right? So from that evolved powerlifting. From that evolved, as you can see there, competitive bench pressing, as well as competitive deadlifting, competitive squatting.